Have you ever looked at a perfect couple and wondered what happens when the doors close? I'm talking about the kind of couple you see in magazines, the tech millionaire and his beautiful, elegant wife. From the outside, they had it all: a stunning waterfront mansion, a life of charity galas, and a love story that seemed unshakable. But a single lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume and a late-night text message were all it took to shatter the illusion. She thought her world was ending when she caught her husband with his young, ambitious secretary. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that for 10 years she'd been nurturing a secret of her own. A secret hidden in plain sight, a secret bank account that was about to change everything. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about the devastating power of underestimation. The chandeliers in the ballroom of the Seattle Art Museum, dripped with crystal casting fractured rainbows across the polished marble floor. Amelia Hayes smoothed the silk of her midnight blue gown. A serene smile fixed on her face as she listened to the mayor drone on about urban renewal. Beside her, her husband, Richard Hayes, stood as a paragon of modern success. His tailored Brioni suit, the subtle glint of his Patek Philippe watch, and the easy confidence in his posture all screamed power. He was the founder and CEO of Hayes Innovations, a titan of the city's booming tech scene, and she was his perfect accessory. For 12 years, this had been her life. She'd orchestrated flawless dinner parties, chaired committees for charities that sounded noble, and cultivated an air of effortless grace. She had given up her own budding career in financial analysis to manage their life, a role Richard called being the CEO of the Hayes household. At first, it sounded like a compliment. Now it felt like a cold, albeit a beautifully gilded one. Their Medina waterfront home was a testament to his success, and her taste a sprawling architectural marvel of glass and steel, softened by her choice of warm woods and plush neutral fabrics. It was a silent, sterile palace where the only sounds were the soft lapping of Lake Washington against their private dock and the hum of the climate control system. It was perfect. It was cold. The first tremor of unease had been subtle, a discordant note in the symphony of their perfect life. It started a few months ago. Richard, once meticulously punctual, began coming home later and later, smelling of the city exhaust fumes, expensive whiskey, and something else. A faint, sweet floral scent that wasn't her Chanel No. 5. When she'd asked, he'd waved a dismissive hand. That new client from Paris, darling. They all bathe in the stuff. You know how it is, endless meetings to close the Aerion deal. She had accepted it. To question him felt like a betrayal of the trust their empire was built on. But the excuse wore thin as the late nights became more frequent. Then came the phone habits. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually in his pocket or placed screen down on his nightstand. A new passcode he'd claimed for enhanced corporate security. Tonight at the gala, he was more distracted than usual. While Amelia engaged with the wives of other tech moguls, discussing summer plans in the San Juans and the merits of private versus public schools, Richard's eyes kept darting towards the entrance. He checked his phone constantly, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Everything all right, darling?" she asked, laying a delicate hand on his arm as they found a moment alone near the silent auction tables. He started pulling his arm away a fraction too quickly. "Fine, fine. Just a server issue at the Frankfurt data center. Always a fire to put out." He gave her a smile that didn't reach his cool grey eyes. "You look stunning tonight, Amy. Truly." The compliment, once a source of warmth, now felt like a well-rehearsed line, a verbal pat on the head. He used her nickname, Amy, when he was placating her. She was Amelia when he was presenting her to the world, and Amy when he needed her to fade into the background. Later, as they were leaving, the valet brought their Bentley around. Richard was on the phone, his back to her, his voice low and urgent. "No, not now. I told you to wait. Just be patient. I'll handle it." He hung up abruptly as she approached. "Frankfurt again?" she asked, her voice light, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in her stomach. "You know it," he said, forcing a weary sigh. "The price of success." The drive home was silent. Richard stared out at the glittering lights of the 520 bridge, lost in a world she was clearly not a part of. Amelia watched his reflection in the window. The handsome face she had fallen in love with now seemed like a mask hiding a stranger. Who was this man? And who was he talking to with such clipped intimacy? Back in their cavernous home, the silence was even more profound. Richard went straight to his study, closing the heavy oak doors behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the marble foyer, like a cell door locking. Amelia stood alone, the shimmering crystals of the chandelier above, casting long, dancing shadows that felt like grasping fingers. She walked into their master bedroom, a space designed to look like a 5-star hotel suite, and just as impersonal. On his side of the bed, on the polished mahogany nightstand, his phone lay face down. A forbidden object. For 12 years, she had never once felt the urge to violate his privacy. Their trust, she had believed, was absolute. But trust was a currency, and hers was rapidly devaluing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was foolish. Paranoid. She was the wife of a powerful man. Of course, he had secrets. Corporate secrets. That's all this was. But the memory of that floral scent, the clipped phone call, the distance in his eyes, it all coalesced into a single unbearable weight of suspicion. With trembling fingers, she picked up the phone. The screen was dark. She pressed the side button. A notification glowed on the lock screen, a message preview from a name she didn't recognize, Chloe Vance. The message was only 2 words, but they detonated her world. "Miss you. Chloe Vance." The name sounded vaguely familiar. Amelia's mind raced, sifting through company newsletters and event photos. And then it hit her. Chloe. Richard's new executive assistant. A stunningly beautiful woman in her late 20s with sharp ambition in her eyes and a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. Richard had praised her efficiency, her dedication, her willingness to work the same insane hours he did. Amelia's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. The gilded cage she had so meticulously decorated had just revealed its bars. She was a prisoner in her own life, and the man she had trusted with her entire world was the warden. The cold, hard reality settled over her, not with a fiery rage, but with a chilling, terrifying clarity. The life she thought she had was a lie. And as she stood there, bathed in the cold moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she felt the first flicker of a long-dormant part of herself begin to stir the sharp, analytical mind of the woman she used to be. The woman she had to become again if she was going to survive this. The days that followed the discovery of the text message were a masterclass in self-control. Amelia moved through her life with the programmed grace of an automaton. She hosted a luncheon for the Children's Hospital Foundation, approved floral arrangements for an upcoming charity auction, and smiled placidly as Richard explained another late night with the excuse of a new product launch. Every word from his mouth now sounded like static, the meaning lost in the deafening roar of his betrayal. She was watching a performance, and she was the only one in the audience who knew the lead actor was a fraud. She needed more than a single text message. A 2-word text could be explained away, twisted with the casual gaslighting Richard had perfected over the years. He would call her crazy, insecure, paranoid. She needed something undeniable, something so concrete it would shatter his carefully constructed world of lies. The analytical part of her brain, the part that once navigated complex market trends and investment portfolios, took over. Emotion was a liability. She needed data. She started small. She paid attention to the credit card statements that came in the mail, statements she usually passed to their accountant without a second glance. Tucked between charges for Brooks Brothers and $500 client dinners, she found them recurring charges at a small, impossibly expensive florist in Pioneer Square, one she had never used. Bouquets of peonies and rare orchids sent to an office address, charges for dinners for 2 at Canlis and the Herb Farm restaurants they hadn't been to together in years. And the most damning of all, a charge from a boutique jeweler, Le Vian, for a delicate diamond necklace. A necklace she had never seen. The evidence was piling up, each receipt a brick in the wall growing between them. Yet it was still circumstantial. He could argue they were client gifts, corporate expenses. She needed to see it, to witness the betrayal with her own eyes. The opportunity came the following Friday. Richard called her in the afternoon, his voice smooth and apologetic. "Darling, I'm so sorry. The investors from Singapore just landed, and we have to do a full-day strategy session tomorrow. It's going to run late all day Saturday. I'll have to miss the charity polo match. Can you make my apologies?" The polo match was their social highlight of the season. For him to miss it was unheard of. The lie was so audacious, so bold, it left her breathless. She played her part. "Oh, Richard, what a shame." "Of course I understand. Work comes first. I'll handle everything." "You're the best, Amy. I'll make it up to you, I promise," he'd said, the lie dripping from his tongue like honey. On Saturday morning, she watched him pack a briefcase, feigning concern. "Will you be staying at the company's downtown apartment? It might be easier than driving back late." "Good idea," he said, kissing her cheek. The gesture felt obscene. "Don't wait up for me." As his Bentley pulled out of the long, winding driveway, Amelia's composure crumbled. She sank onto the cold marble of the foyer, the facade of the perfect wife dissolving into a storm of silent, gut-wrenching sobs. But as the tears subsided, they were replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was it. She had done her research. A week ago, she had quietly installed a GPS tracker on his car, a small magnetic device she'd bought online. It felt like a sordid, desperate act, but desperation was now her reality. She opened the app on her phone. His car wasn't heading towards the Hayes Innovations headquarters downtown. It was heading north towards the picturesque seclusion of the Salish Lodge, the luxury hotel perched atop the breathtaking Snoqualmie Falls, a place known for romantic getaways. She changed out of her equestrian whites and into a simple pair of jeans and a dark jacket, pulling her hair back and hiding her face behind a pair of large sunglasses. She drove her own car, a modest Lexus SUV that Richard called her errand car, feeling like a spy in her own life. The hour-long drive was a blur of numbing dread and furious adrenaline. She parked at a distance, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The app showed his car was in the guest parking lot. Now what? She couldn't just storm the lobby. She needed to be sure. She waited the minutes, stretching into an eternity. An hour passed, then 2. She was about to give up to convince herself she was wrong when she saw them. They emerged from the hotel's main entrance, hand in hand. Richard was laughing a genuine, carefree laugh she hadn't heard directed at her in years. And beside him, looking up at him with undisguised adoration, was Chloe Vance. She was wearing a beautiful summer dress, and around her slender neck, catching the afternoon sun, was a delicate diamond necklace. The necklace from Le Vian. The sight was so cinematic, so perfectly staged it felt unreal. It was the confirmation she needed, but seeing it was like a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The world tilted on its axis. For a moment she thought she might be sick. They weren't rushing. They ambled towards the scenic overlook, the one famous for its panoramic view of the falls. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close and whispering something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. He leaned in and kissed her a long, lingering kiss, filled with a passion he no longer showed Amelia. Amelia's hand instinctively went to her phone. She didn't know why, but she raised it, the lens shaking in her trembling grip. She zoomed in her finger, hovering over the button. The image filled her screen. Her husband, the man who had promised to love and cherish her, kissing his assistant against the romantic backdrop of a waterfall, the stolen necklace glittering at her throat. Click. The sound of the digital shutter was a gunshot in the silent car. She took another and another. Cold, irrefutable proof. The rage she had been suppressing for weeks finally erupted a white-hot inferno that burned away the tears and the shock, leaving behind something new, something solid and unyielding. She didn't confront them. What was the point? A screaming match in a hotel parking lot. That was a scene from a bad movie. Her play would be on a different stage entirely. She put the car in reverse, her movements steady and precise. She drove away from the falls, away from the smoldering wreckage of her marriage, not looking back. The woman who drove to Snoqualmie Falls was a heartbroken wife. The woman who drove back to Seattle was an architect, and she was about to start drawing up the blueprints for Richard's demise. The drive back to Medina was a study in profound silence. The roaring waterfall was replaced by the low hum of the Lexus, a sound that seemed to amplify the ringing in Amelia's ears. She did not cry. The images she had captured were seared onto her mind, a digital monument to her husband's treachery. The grief was there, a vast hollow cavern in her chest, but it was overshadowed by a chilling razor-sharp focus. The question was no longer if her marriage was over, but how she would orchestrate its end. When she arrived back at the empty, echoing house, she didn't go to their bedroom, a room now tainted by his lies. Instead, she walked directly to the library. It was her sanctuary, the one room in the house that felt truly hers, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books on history, art, and finance. It was the place she retreated to when the vapid social obligations became too much. She sat down at the antique mahogany desk that had belonged to her grandmother, Eleanor. Eleanor had been the true matriarch of their family, a sharp, fiercely independent woman who had built a small fortune in real estate long before it was common for women to do so. She had always been wary of Richard's slick charm. A man who shines that brightly in public, she used to say, often casts the darkest shadows at home. Before she passed away 10 years ago, Eleanor had pulled Amelia aside. "Your husband is a successful man, Amelia, but success can make a man careless. It can make him think he is invincible. Never, ever let your security depend entirely on a man, no matter how much you love him." A week later, her grandmother's lawyer had contacted her. Eleanor had left her an inheritance of $250,000, but with a strict and secret stipulation, it was to be deposited into a private bank account under Amelia's maiden name, an account Richard was to know nothing about. "This is your escape hatch," the letter from her grandmother read. "I hope you never have to use it, but if you do, make sure it's a golden one." For 10 years, that account had been her secret. It was her one act of private rebellion in a life of public compliance. In the early years of her marriage, before Richard's success had exploded, he had often belittled her financial acumen. "Darling, you're brilliant with charities and guest lists," he'd say, with a condescending smile. "Leave the numbers to me. The market is a brutal place for amateurs." The insult had stung, but it had also ignited a spark of her old self, the summa cum laude graduate in economics, the woman who had been at the top of her analyst training program at Goldman Sachs before she met him. So she had taken her grandmother's gift not as an escape hatch, but as a challenge. She opened her laptop, a sleek personal device Richard didn't even know she had, and logged into a heavily encrypted portal. The screen flickered to life, displaying the dashboard of a Swiss bank account under the name Amelia Sterling. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She hadn't been idle for the last decade. While Richard saw her as a socialite managing caterers, she had been managing a burgeoning portfolio. She had spent her quiet afternoons when Richard assumed she was at yoga or having lunch, studying global markets, analyzing emerging tech sectors, and making shrewd, calculated investments. She pored over quarterly reports and market analyses with the same intensity she applied to planning a gala. She'd invested in biotech startups he'd dismissed as frivolous. She'd shorted a real estate bubble he had been convinced would never burst. She'd bought into renewable energy, companies long before they were fashionable. She had played the long game, her strategy patient, diversified, and entirely invisible. The initial $250,000 had grown. Steadily at first, then exponentially. She watched the number on the screen settle the final tally of 10 years of silent, diligent work. $14,782,416.38. A gasp escaped her lips. She had known it was substantial, but seeing the final figure laid out in stark black and white was staggering. It was more than just money. It was power. It was independence. It was a golden escape hatch, just as her grandmother had intended. But as she sat there, the photo of Richard and Chloe burning in her mind, she realized it could be so much more. An escape was too passive. This fund wasn't a shield. It was a sword. Richard's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He believed he was the only financial genius in their marriage. He saw her as decorative, intellectually soft, incapable of understanding the complex world in which he operated. He had no idea that the amateur had been quietly running her own private hedge fund from the library of their home. A plan began to form. Not a frantic, emotional reaction, but a cold, strategic campaign. A simple divorce was not enough. A man like Richard wouldn't just lose a wife. He would spin the narrative painting her as a disgruntled, money-hungry spouse. He would protect his public image at all costs. To truly make him pay for the years of condescension and the ultimate betrayal she had to hit him where he lived, his company, his legacy, his pride. She spent the rest of the weekend not weeping, but working. She delved into the public financials of Hayes Innovations, but this time with a new adversarial perspective. Richard was preparing for a massive merger with a German tech conglomerate, Arion. It was the deal he'd been working on for over a year, the one he claimed was responsible for all his late nights. He had told the board and investors it would make them the undisputed leader in their field. But Amelia, reading between the lines of the press releases and shareholder reports, saw something else. The deal was structured in a way that seemed to disproportionately benefit Richard's personal stock options and holding companies while leveraging the company with an immense amount of debt. It was a golden parachute for him, but a potential anchor for the company he'd built. It was risky. It was arrogant. It was pure Richard. And it was his vulnerability. She closed the laptop as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the library. Richard would be home soon, full of fake apologies and tired excuses about his grueling work session. Amelia stood up, her back straight, a newfound strength settling deep in her bones. She would play her part one last time. She would be the gracious, understanding wife. She would smile and she would nod. But behind the smile, the architect of silence was designing a new world, one built not on his lies, but on the foundations of his ruin. The game had changed. He just didn't know he was playing. The next few weeks were a delicate, dangerous dance. Amelia maintained the veneer of normalcy with a discipline that surprised even herself. She listened to Richard's embellished stories about the Arion merger negotiations, feigning interest and offering supportive smiles. Inside, she was a whirlwind of focused activity, operating with the covert precision of a spy. Her days were no longer filled with charity committee meetings and social calls. They were spent in quiet consultation with a new, very different kind of team. Her first move was to hire Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was not a typical high-powered divorce attorney from a glossy downtown firm. She was a legend in certain circles, a semi-retired forensic accountant turned private investigator who specialized in uncovering the financial sins of the rich and powerful. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that Amelia found immensely comforting. She worked from a discreet office in an old brick building in Georgetown, far from the gleaming towers where men like Richard made their fortunes. Amelia laid out the entire story in Evelyn's quiet, book-lined office, ending with the photographs from Snoqualmie Falls and the balance of her secret Swiss account. She expected a reaction shock, perhaps, or pity. Instead, Evelyn simply nodded, a flicker of grim appreciation in her eyes. "Good for your grandmother," Evelyn said, her voice a low rasp. "And good for you for turning it into a war chest. Most women in your position come to me with tears and suspicions. You've come with evidence and capital. This changes the entire dynamic." Evelyn's first task was to conduct a deep-dive financial audit of Richard and Hayes Innovations, using channels that wouldn't raise any red flags. While Evelyn's team began tracing the labyrinthine network of shell corporations and offshore accounts Richard used to hide his personal wealth, Amelia turned her attention to the company itself. She knew she couldn't simply dump her $14 million into Hayes Innovation stock. It would be too obvious and wouldn't give her the kind of leverage she needed. Her strategy had to be more subtle, more insidious. She began to build a different kind of portfolio. Working through her Swiss bank and a series of anonymous brokerage accounts set up by Evelyn's contacts, Amelia began acquiring strategic assets. She didn't just buy stock in Hayes Innovations. She bought shares in its key suppliers. She invested in the small, innovative tech firms that Richard's company relied on for crucial patents and components. She bought into the logistics companies that handled their distribution. She was weaving a web, and every strand she acquired gave her a small, unseen measure of control over the ecosystem in which Richard's company operated. Her most audacious move was directed at the Arion merger itself. Using a cut-out and independent investment firm in Luxembourg, that Evelyn vetted Amelia began quietly purchasing shares of Arion. The German company's stock was undervalued as the market was nervous about the debt they would be taking on in the merger. But Amelia's research, combined with the inside knowledge she'd gleaned from Richard's own unguarded comments over the years, told her that Arion's core technology was far more valuable than its current stock price reflected. Richard was, in essence, trying to buy a diamond for the price of glass. Amelia's days took on a new rhythm. Mornings were for playing the part of Mrs. Hayes. Afternoons were spent in encrypted video calls with Evelyn or poring over financial data in her library, the door securely locked. She learned that Richard had set up a generous private slush fund disguised as a corporate development budget, which he used to finance his life with Chloe. The apartment where Chloe lived was leased by a shell corporation owned by Hayes Innovations. The car she drove was a company car. He wasn't just having an affair, he was embezzling company funds to pay for it. Evelyn delivered the information without emotion, just a series of damning spreadsheets and documents. "He's arrogant, and arrogance makes men sloppy," Evelyn stated. "He thinks the company is his personal piggy bank. The board might be willing to overlook a discreet affair, but this is fraud. This is a breach of fiduciary duty." The knowledge was sickening yet empowering. Each piece of evidence was another stone in the foundation of her case. Richard's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a deep-seated character flaw, a rot that permeated every aspect of his life. He felt entitled to take whatever he wanted, her career, her trust, his company's money, without consequence. One evening, Richard came home in a triumphant mood. He poured 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to her with a flourish. "To the future, Amy. We're in the final stages. A few more details to iron out and the Arion deal is done. This will cement my legacy." Amelia raised her glass, her expression carefully neutral. "That's wonderful, Richard. You've worked so hard for this." "It's all been for us," he said, looking at her with an earnestness that made her stomach turn. "To secure our future." She smiled, a cold, brittle thing. "Our future." She repeated the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. She took a sip of the champagne, its bubbles fizzing on her tongue. It tasted like victory, but not the victory he was celebrating. She was no longer just building a case for divorce. She was building an arsenal. And as she looked at her husband, so smug and self-assured in his presumed triumph, she knew he had absolutely no idea he was standing on a battlefield of her creation. The day of the final board meeting to approve the Arion merger arrived with the kind of crisp, clear Seattle sky that felt like a lie. For Richard, it was supposed to be the coronation of his career. For Amelia, it was Judgment Day. In the week leading up to it, Evelyn's work had culminated in a thick, meticulously organized binder. It contained bank statements, lease agreements, email trails, and sworn affidavits. It was a complete and utter demolition of Richard Hayes's professional and personal life. Armed with this, Amelia's lawyer had drafted the divorce filing, but they held off on submitting it. The timing had to be perfect. Amelia's own preparations were complete. Through her various holding companies and the Luxembourg firm, She had quietly amassed a 7% stake in Arion, the German company. It wasn't a controlling interest, but it was enough to make her a significant minority shareholder, a voice that could not be legally ignored, especially in a contentious merger. More importantly, she now held sway over two of Hayes Innovation's key suppliers, giving her indirect leverage that no one on the board could possibly anticipate. The plan was audacious, a high-wire act with no safety net. Evelyn had urged caution. "You have enough to ruin him in a divorce court, Amelia. You don't need to do this. It's risky." "A divorce court will give me his money." Amelia had replied, her voice steady. "I want his respect, and the only way to get that from a man like Richard is to beat him at his own game." The board meeting was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. at the Hayes Innovations headquarters. At 1:30 p.m., Amelia walked into the gleaming lobby of the skyscraper. She was not dressed as Mrs. Hayes, the society wife. She wore a bespoke graphite grey suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She looked like what she once was, and was again a formidable financial mind. She was met at the elevator by Michael Peterson, the company's general counsel and an old friend of Richard's. He looked at her in surprise. "Amelia." "What a surprise. Richard didn't mention you were stopping by. He doesn't know," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need a word with the board. It's a matter of shareholder importance." Confusion warred with professional obligation on Michael's face. "The board is about to go into a closed session for the merger vote." "I'm aware," Amelia said, stepping into the elevator. "That's precisely why I'm here." She arrived at the 40th floor, the executive level, and was escorted to the main boardroom. The long, polished mahogany table was surrounded by the company's board members, a collection of stern, powerful men in expensive suits. Richard was at the head of the table looking over his notes. When he saw her, his face went from shock to annoyance. "Amy, what on earth are you doing here? This is a closed meeting." His voice was a harsh whisper, meant for her ears only. "I'm here to speak as a concerned party, Richard," she said, her voice calm and carrying through the silent room. She placed a slim leather portfolio on the table, but did not sit down. Richard forced a laugh, turning to the other board members. "Gentlemen, my apologies. My wife is obviously confused. Amy, we can talk about this at home." "No, Richard. We'll talk about it now." From her portfolio, she produced a single document and handed it to the chairman of the board. A stoic man named Arthur Vance, no relation to Chloe. A cruel irony. "Mr. Vance, my name is Amelia Sterling. Sterling is my maiden name. I am the principal of the Sterling Group, a private investment firm, registered in Luxembourg. My firm currently holds a 7.2% equity stake in Arion." A ripple of shock went through the room. Richard's face went pale. He stared at her, as if seeing a ghost. "What kind of joke is this Sterling Group?" "Amy, stop this nonsense." Amelia ignored him, addressing the board. "I have serious concerns about the proposed structure of this merger, specifically the debt load it places on Hayes Innovations and the disproportionate compensation package being awarded to the CEO. It seems designed less for the long-term health of this company and more for the short-term enrichment of its chief executive." "This is outrageous," Richard blustered, finding his voice. "She has no idea what she's talking about." Amelia then placed a second, much thicker binder on the table. "I also have concerns about a pattern of misappropriation of corporate assets by the CEO." She opened the binder, revealing crisp copies of the apartment lease for Chloe Vance, receipts for jewelry, travel itineraries for romantic getaways, all paid for through a corporate slush fund. This apartment, these trips, these gifts, all for Mr. Hayes' executive assistant, Chloe Vance, were billed to a corporate development account. I believe the term for that is embezzlement. A clear and profound breach of fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders. The silence in the room was absolute. The board members stared first at the documents, then at Richard, whose face had drained of all color. He looked at Amelia, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and pure fury. He saw for the first time not the compliant wife he had molded, but the brilliant woman he had tried to erase. As a significant shareholder in the company you are about to acquire, Amelia continued, her voice cutting through the tension like glass, the Sterling Group cannot and will not approve this merger under the current leadership. We have no confidence in Mr. Hayes' governance or his character. We will be voting our shares against the acquisition and will be encouraging other institutional investors to do the same, citing these financial irregularities. She had him. He was trapped between the personal humiliation and the professional detonation. If the board backed him, she would leak the documents and crater the Aryan deal from the outside, likely triggering an SEC investigation. If they sided with her, his reign was over. Arthur Vance, the chairman, finally broke the silence. He looked at the damning evidence, then at Richard's ashen face. His expression was grim. "Richard," he said, his voice heavy with finality, "I think it's best if you and your wife step outside while the board confers." It was a dismissal, a coup delivered not by a corporate raider, but by the woman he thought was at home planning a dinner party. As Amelia turned and walked towards the door, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor, Richard remained frozen, staring at the ruins of his life spread across the boardroom table. The gilded cage was gone, and the woman who had emerged was someone he didn't know at all. The boardroom doors closed with a soft, definitive click, sealing Richard's fate. Amelia didn't wait in the hallway. She strode to the elevator, her composure a mask of ice over a maelstrom of emotions. She felt a grim satisfaction, a surge of vindication, but no joy. This was a demolition, and even a necessary one leaves rubble. Richard stumbled out of the boardroom a few minutes later, his face a mask of disbelief. He caught up to her, just as the elevator arrived. "Amelia, what have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You've destroyed me. You've destroyed everything we built." The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. He followed the doors, closing them into a small mirrored box. For the first time, she saw raw, unfiltered panic in his eyes. The charming, powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate man. "We didn't build this, Richard," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You built a company, and I built a home, and you desecrated both. You think this is about your affair. This is about the breathtaking arrogance of your deceit. You lied to your wife, you lied to your board, and you stole from your own company. The only person who destroyed you is the man in the mirror." "Chloe." She meant nothing. He pleaded a pathetic last-ditch effort. It was a mistake. Was it a mistake to put her up in a corporate apartment? Was it a mistake to buy her jewelry with shareholder money? Amelia's voice was like chipping ice. She wasn't a mistake, Richard. She was a business expense. And that's the part they'll never forgive you for. The elevator reached the lobby. As the doors opened, Amelia stepped out, leaving him standing there amidst his own shattered reflection. She didn't look back. The fallout was swift and brutal. By the end of the day, the board of Hayes Innovations had requested Richard's immediate resignation. Faced with the threat of a full-blown SEC investigation and a shareholder lawsuit led by the mysterious and suddenly powerful Sterling Group, he had no choice but to accept. The news of his departure, citing personal reasons, was sent out in a sterile press release by morning. The Aryan merger was put on indefinite hold. The German company, spooked by the sudden leadership change and rumors of financial impropriety, backed away. Richard's legacy, the deal meant to cement his place in the pantheon of tech gods, had evaporated overnight. His personal life imploded with equal speed. When the news broke, Chloe Vance was unceremoniously fired. Her corporate apartment lease was terminated, the company car repossessed. Richard, stripped of his power and his corporate credit cards, was of no more use to her. Her calls to him went unanswered. She was collateral damage in a war she hadn't even known was being fought. The day after the board meeting, Richard arrived home to find the locks changed. A stoic security guard hired by Amelia handed him a box containing a few personal effects and a letter from her attorney. It informed him that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that he was to have no contact with her outside of their legal counsel. The Medina mansion, purchased before their marriage, and thus not community property under their prenuptial agreement, was hers. The story leaked, as it was always bound to do. The business journals were circumspect, speaking of a shareholder revolt and questions of corporate governance. The society pages were far more direct. Whispers turned into headlines. Tech titan Richard Hayes, ousted amid scandal. They painted a sordid picture of embezzlement and a tawdry office affair. The public image he had so carefully cultivated was shattered, replaced by the caricature of a greedy, cheating cliché. He was a pariah in the city he once ruled. Amelia, meanwhile, was shielded from the public fallout. She remained in the house on the lake, the silence now a comfort rather than a curse. She watched the news reports dispassionately. The man on the screen, hounded by reporters outside his lawyer's office, looked like a stranger, haggard, broken and small. A month later, they met in a sterile conference room to sign the final divorce papers. Richard looked 10 years older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed weariness. He didn't speak to her, directing his few mumbled words to his lawyer. He signed the documents officially dissolving their marriage and relinquishing any claim to her personal assets, a portfolio which his lawyers had discovered with astonishment was now significantly larger than his own diminished net worth. As he pushed the papers across the table, his eyes met hers for a fleeting moment. There was no anger left, only a profound, bewildered sense of defeat. He finally understood. He hadn't been married to a decorative object. He had been married to a queen, and he had been too blind to see the crown. Amelia signed her name with a steady hand. Amelia Sterling. It felt like coming home. She walked out of that office not as a scorned wife or a wealthy divorcee, but as the architect of her own life, ready to build something new on the land she had cleared. The months following the divorce were not a time of celebration, but of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. The media frenzy, a voracious but fickle beast, eventually moved on to the next scandal, the next fallen titan. Richard Hayes became a cautionary tale, whispered at cocktail parties and business lunches, a ghost in the city he once sought to conquer. Reports trickled in that he had sold his remaining devalued stock and moved to Scottsdale, disappearing into a life of sun-drenched obscurity and golf courses, a gilded purgatory of his own making. Amelia, however, did not disappear. Her first act as a truly free woman was to sell the cold glass and steel mansion in Medina. Before the realtors descended, she walked through its cavernous rooms one last time. The house, once a symbol of her success as the perfect wife, now felt like an elaborate museum exhibit dedicated to a life that was never truly hers. The sunlight streamed through the immense windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air where priceless art had once hung. The echoes of her footsteps on the marble floors sounded like a final lonely farewell. She didn't take the designer furniture, the curated art, or the custom Italian kitchenware. She took only her books, a small, beautiful painting of the sea her mother had given her, and a framed photograph of her grandmother Eleanor. Everything else represented a lie, and she was done with lies. She found her new home not in the secluded enclaves of the ultra-wealthy, but on a tree-lined street on Capitol Hill. It was a beautiful, historic brownstone, filled with the kind of warmth and character that can only be earned over a century. It had built-in bookshelves that groaned with history, a fireplace that crackled with life, and a small walled garden where she could feel the earth on her hands. The silence that filled this home was not the sterile, empty silence of the Medina mansion. It was a peaceful, contented silence, rich with the promise of a life authentically lived. For the first month, she did very little. She read, she gardened. She reconnected with the few friends who had known her before she became Mrs. Richard Hayes. She could have retired. She had the means to spend the rest of her days traveling the world in opulent comfort, managing her vast fortune from a distance. It was the life everyone, including Richard, had assumed she wanted. But as she sat in her library one rainy afternoon, looking at the staggering numbers in her portfolio, she felt a profound sense of emptiness. The money had been a weapon, a tool for liberation. But what was its purpose? Now, her eyes fell upon the photo of Eleanor, her grandmother's sharp, intelligent gaze, seeming to look right through her. She remembered Eleanor's words not just from her letter, but from a conversation they'd had long ago. Money is a tool, Amelia. It can build a cage, or it can forge a key. The choice is in the hands of the woman who holds it. Her grandmother had given her an escape hatch, a key, and in that moment, Amelia knew what she had to do. She wasn't meant to simply enjoy her freedom. She was meant to forge keys for other women. She liquidated a significant portion of her portfolio and began the arduous but rewarding process of creating the Eleanor Sterling Foundation. Its mission was simple, yet revolutionary in its focus to provide financial literacy education, legal aid, and seed funding for women seeking to escape abusive or controlling relationships. She knew firsthand that financial dependence was the strongest, most invisible bar on any cage. Her first hire was a woman named Jessica Morales, a sharp, passionate lawyer who had spent a decade working pro bono for domestic abuse survivors. Jessica was initially skeptical, arriving at their first meeting in Amelia's brownstone with a wary professionalism. She'd seen wealthy, bored divorcees start vanity charities before. "With all due respect, Mrs. Sterling," Jessica began. "It's Amelia," she corrected gently. "And I understand your hesitation, but I don't want to just write checks. I want to build a system. A woman who leaves an abusive partner doesn't just need a shelter for the night. She needs to know how to open a bank account he can't touch. She needs to understand her credit score. She needs the capital to secure an apartment and the skills to get a job that can support her and her children. She needs an escape hatch that leads to a sustainable future." As Amelia laid out her meticulously detailed business plan, complete with projected budgets, strategic partnerships, and a curriculum for financial education, Jessica's skepticism melted away, replaced by a dawning respect. Here was not a dilettante, but a strategist. The foundation's office was not on the 40th floor of a skyscraper, but in a repurposed warehouse in Sodo, with exposed brick walls, large windows, and an open, collaborative atmosphere. It hummed with a quiet, fierce energy. One of their first grantees was a young woman named Sophie, who sat across from Amelia, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a cup of tea. She had just left a husband who had controlled every aspect of her life, giving her a small cash allowance each week and monitoring every penny she spent. He told me I was terrible with money. Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. That I was flighty and irresponsible, that I'd be lost without him. After 10 years, I believed him. When I finally left, I realized I didn't even know how to set up an online bill payment. Amelia listened, her heart aching with a familiar pain. She didn't share the details of her own story, but she shared its essence. The greatest lie you can be told is that you are not capable. She said, her voice full of a conviction that was both gentle and unyielding. He didn't think you were incapable. He was terrified of you discovering how capable you are. Your strength was there all along. We're just here to give you the tools to rebuild its foundation. Over the next few months, Amelia personally mentored Sophie. She drew on her old, dormant skills as a financial analyst, helping Sophie draft a business plan for the graphic design company she'd always dreamed of starting. They went over budgets, marketing strategies, and pricing models. For the first time, Amelia was using her brilliant mind for finance, not to amass wealth, but to build a life. As she watched Sophie blossom, securing her first clients, signing the lease on a small office, and speaking with a confidence that had been brutally suppressed for years, Amelia felt a sense of fulfillment that no stock market victory had ever provided. Her legacy was not the spectacular downfall of Richard Hayes. That was merely the clearing of the land. Her true legacy was being built here, in this brick-walled office, with every woman who walked through their doors. On one wall of the foundation, Jessica had started a wall of futures, pinning up photos and thank you notes from the women they had helped. A picture of Sophie cutting the ribbon on her new office. A note from a mother who had finally been able to afford a lawyer to win full custody of her children. A photo of a woman receiving her nursing degree. One evening, Amelia stood before the wall, tracing the smiling faces with her fingertips. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica. FYI, Sophie just landed the design contract for the city's new tourism campaign. She's officially a success. A genuine warm smile spread across Amelia's face. She looked out the large window at the bustling city lights, the same lights she used to watch from her gilded cage. She had been the perfect wife, then the perfect architect of a man's ruin. But now, finally, she was simply Amelia Sterling, master of her own foundation, building futures, one woman at a time. And her life had never been richer. Amelia's story shows us that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. She transformed her pain into a strategy and used the very skills her husband dismissed to reclaim her life and build a new legacy. It's a powerful reminder that underestimation is a dangerous game, and true strength isn't about the life you're given, but the one you have the courage to build for yourself. What did you think of Amelia's incredible journey from a betrayed wife to a powerful philanthropist? Do you think her revenge was justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspective makes this community what it is. If this story moved you or made you think, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of incredible resilience and unexpected twists. Thank you for listening. A whisper can be louder than a shout. For Kendall Mayo, her husband's whisper was a cage, its bars forged from words like unsuitable, simple, and not right for the occasion. He was Tavian Grimsby, a titan of industry, whose world was built on polished surfaces and ruthless ambition, and she was his forgotten masterpiece hidden away in the attic. He believed she belonged in the shadows, a quiet keeper of his home while he conquered the world. But what happens when the cage door is left open, leading not to an escape, but to the very stage where her captor stands? The penthouse air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken disappointment. It clung to the velvet drapes and settled on the cold marble floors of the sprawling apartment that overlooked the city's glittering heart. From the bedroom, Kendall Mayo could hear the telltale sounds of her husband, Tavian Grimsby, preparing for his evening. The sharp click of a watch clasp, the soft thud of a shoe brush against Italian leather, the rustle of a bespoke suit being lifted from its silk covering. Each sound was a tick of the clock, counting down to another evening she would spend alone. She stood before the full-length antique mirror in her dressing room, a space Tavian had designed but she rarely used. She ran a hand over the simple navy blue dress. She wore a comfortable garment that felt like a second skin. It was elegant in its own way, but in Tavian's world, elegance was measured in carats and designer labels, not quiet dignity. Tavian strode into the room, a vision of tailored perfection. His dark hair was meticulously styled. His jaw was set with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, and his steel-grey eyes swept over her with a familiar dismissive glance. "You're still wearing that?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. He wasn't really asking a question. He was passing a verdict. Kendall's hands fell to her sides. "I was hoping. Maybe I could come with you tonight, Tavian. It's the Starlight Charity Gala. We haven't been out together in months." Her voice was soft, a hopeful melody in the sterile silence of their home. Tavian sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured tolerance. He walked over to his valet stand, adjusting the knot of his silver tie in the mirror, his reflection giving her more attention than he did. "Kendall, we've been over this. The gala is a crucial event for the new waterfront development. I'll be networking with the Beaumonts, the Vanderbilts. Everyone who matters will be there." "I matter," she whispered the words barely audible. He finally turned to face her, his expression a mask of strained patience. "Of course you do, darling. You matter here in our home. But out there, it's a different world. It's a performance. You have to know the players, the script. You're too genuine for that." It was the cruelest kind of insult, wrapped in the guise of a compliment. He called her genuine, but what he meant was unpolished, unsophisticated, unfit for public display. He made her virtues sound like liabilities. "I can learn," she insisted, a flicker of defiance in her gentle brown eyes. "I read about the Beaumont Foundation's new initiative. I could talk to Mrs. Beaumont about her work in art restoration. We share that interest." Tavian let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be naive. Genevieve Beaumont doesn't want to discuss dusty canvases with the wife of a potential business partner. She wants to see power influence. She wants to be charmed." He gestured vaguely at her simple dress. "And frankly, Kendall, you don't look the part. You would be a distraction." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. A distraction. That's what she was to him. Not a partner, not a wife, but a potential complication to his carefully curated image. The hope in her chest shriveled and died, replaced by a familiar cold ache. She had met Tavian in a university library. He had been captivated, he'd said, by her quiet intelligence and her passion for history. She was an art history scholar with a promising future. But after they married, he had systematically dismantled that future. Her academic pursuits were deemed hobbies. Her friends were unambitious. Her world, once vibrant with intellectual curiosity, had shrunk to the size of their penthouse. He had convinced her it was for the best that his world was enough for both of them. Now she saw the truth. He hadn't wanted a partner. He'd wanted an ornament, and when she'd failed to glitter in the way he demanded, he had simply put her away on a shelf. "I see," she said, her voice flat. She retreated into herself, pulling a cloak of calm resignation around her shoulders. It was a defense mechanism she had perfected over years of marriage. Seeing her surrender, Tavian's demeanor softened, becoming patronizingly gentle. "Hey," he said, walking over and tipping her chin up with a finger. "It's for the best. You hate these stuffy events anyway. Why don't you order in from that little Italian place you like? Get some rest. I'll be late." He kissed her on the forehead, a sterile, dismissive gesture that felt more like a brand than a sign of affection. Then he turned and walked away, his confident footsteps echoing on the marble. Kendall stood motionless, listening as he left the apartment. The heavy front door clicked shut, followed by the soft whir of the private elevator descending. And then silence. A profound, deafening silence that filled every corner of their magnificent, empty home. She looked at her reflection again. A woman trapped in a gilded cage, whose wings had been clipped so methodically, she'd almost forgotten she was meant to fly. Tonight, Tavian had made it clear he would soar, and she would remain grounded. But even the quietest soul has a breaking point, and in the suffocating silence of the penthouse, a tiny forgotten spark of rebellion began to glow. The silence that Tavian left behind was a physical presence. It pressed in on Kendall, amplifying the ticking of the grand clock in the foyer and the distant, mournful siren wailing across the city. For a long while, she didn't move from her spot in the dressing room. His words, a distraction, echoed in her mind, each repetition chipping away at the fragile remnants of her self-worth. She had loved him once fiercely and completely. She had believed in the future he'd painted for them, a partnership of equals. But the man who had just walked out the door was a stranger, a sculptor who had tried to chisel her into an image of his own making, and upon finding the stone of her character, too resilient, had simply abandoned the project. Drifting aimlessly through the cavernous apartment, she eventually found herself in the one room that was truly hers, the library. It was less a library and more a workshop. Canvases in various states of restoration leaned against walls lined with books on art conservation and chemical analysis. A large table in the center was covered with brushes, solvents, and magnifying lamps. This was her sanctuary, the last bastion of the woman she used to be. Her gaze fell upon a particular painting, resting on an easel in the corner, illuminated by a single, soft light. It was a 17th-century landscape by a lesser-known artist, a piece she'd acquired at a small estate auction. The canvas was cracked and obscured by centuries of grime, its vibrant soul hidden beneath a veil of neglect. She felt a kinship with it. Running her fingers gently over the darkened surface, she felt a familiar pull, a desire to heal, to reveal the beauty hidden beneath the damage. This was where she found her voice, not in words, but in the patient, meticulous work of her hands. It was a language Tavian had never bothered to understand. Sighing, she turned away the energy for even her passion deserting her. She walked to the large mahogany desk that had once been her father's and sat down, staring blankly at the polished wood grain. She felt a profound sense of hopelessness. Perhaps Tavian was right. Perhaps she was just a relic, ill-suited for the modern, high-stakes world he inhabited. Her eyes landed on her laptop. On a whim, she opened it, the screen casting a pale blue light on her face. Her inbox was mostly spam and newsletters she never read. But then she saw it. An email that had arrived 2 days ago buried beneath the digital junk mail. The subject line was simple: regarding your monograph on Venetian varnish techniques. Her brow furrowed. She had published that paper over 6 years ago in a small, obscure academic journal. It was a deeply technical piece, the culmination of her postgraduate research written before Tavian had convinced her to abandon her academic career. She had assumed it had vanished into the ether, read by no one. The sender was a name that made her breath catch in her throat. Desmond Pierce, chief curator of the Metropolitan Legacy Museum. He was a legend in the art world, a man whose opinion could make or break careers. With a trembling hand, she clicked open the email. Dear Ms. Mayo, please forgive the unsolicited correspondence. I recently had the pleasure of discovering your monograph, a chemical and historical analysis of Venetian varnish techniques, 1550 to 1650. To say I was impressed would be a gross understatement. Your insights are not merely academic. They are the work of a true practitioner with an intuitive understanding of the old masters. The Metropolitan Legacy Museum is about to embark on its most ambitious restoration project, to date the complete restoration of the Beaumont collection, recently bequeathed to us by the Beaumont Foundation. The centerpiece is a triptych that has baffled conservators for decades, due to its unique and deteriorating finish, believed to be from the very period you specialize in. I know this is forward, but I would be honored if you would consider lending your expertise to this project. In fact, Mrs. Genevieve Beaumont, herself the patron of the collection, has expressed a keen interest in meeting the author of the monograph that has given us our first real hope for the collection. She is hosting the Starlight Charity Gala this evening. I realize this is incredibly short notice, but I am attending and would be delighted if you would join me as my personal guest. It would be the perfect, informal setting for you to meet Mrs. Beaumont and discuss the possibility of leading this historic undertaking. I sincerely hope you will consider it. Yours respectfully, Desmond Pierce, Chief Curator, Metropolitan Legacy Museum. Kendall read the email once then, twice then a third time. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, joyful rhythm she hadn't felt in years. It felt like a dream, a fantasy conjured from her own despair. Desmond Pierce, Genevieve Beaumont. The Starlight Gala. Her first thought was a surge of pure, unadulterated validation. Someone saw her. Someone of consequence had looked past the simple, quiet woman and seen the scholar, the expert, the artist. The very interest she'd mentioned to Tavian, the one he had scoffed at, was the exact reason she was being sought out by the most respected figures in the field. Her second thought was a wave of cold, crippling doubt. I can't. Tavian's voice was in her head again. You don't look the part. You're a distraction. You don't fit in. She pictured herself at the gala, in her simple dress, surrounded by women dripping in diamonds and couture. She imagined Tavian's face, his shock turning to fury. The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in her stomach. She closed the laptop, her hand shaking. It was impossible. It was too late. She wasn't that person anymore. Tavian had made sure of it. But then her eyes drifted back to the darkened painting on the easel. It was waiting patiently, its hidden beauty still there, obscured but not extinguished. All it needed was a skilled and steady hand to peel back the layers of neglect and let its light shine through. A slow, defiant fire began to burn in her veins. For years, she had allowed Tavian to be the grime, the dust, the discolored varnish that obscured her own brilliance. He had told her what she was, and like a fool, she had believed him. She stood up, her posture straighter than it had been in years. Desmond Pierce's email wasn't just an invitation. It was a key. It was a chance not just to restore a painting, but to restore herself. "I am not a distraction," she said aloud, her voice ringing with newfound clarity in the silent room. "I am the main event." The clock in the foyer began to chime. She had less than 2 hours. Panic, sharp and electrifying, was the first emotion to hit Kendall quickly, followed by a wave of exhilarating determination. 2 hours. It felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Her mind, so often dulled by the monotony of her life, was now racing, firing with a speed and clarity she had forgotten she possessed. Her first move was to her closet, a vast walk-in space filled with racks of clothes Tavian's stylists had chosen for her. They were beautiful, expensive, and utterly soulless. Beige cashmere, sensible grey suits, pastel day dresses. They were the clothes of a woman designed to blend in, to be pleasant and unobtrusive. They were the uniform of the cage. She pushed past them dismissively, her hands flying over the hangers until they reached the very back behind a row of winter coats. There, shrouded in a heavy canvas garment bag, was the dress. She had bought it 5 years ago on a solo trip to Paris, one of her last acts of defiance before Tavian had curtailed her independent travel. It was a couturier piece from a small independent designer, purchased in a moment of reckless abandon. She had never worn it. Tavian had seen it once and declared it far too dramatic. With a deep breath, she unzipped the bag. The dress spilled out like liquid midnight. It was a deep, starless emerald green, fashioned from a heavy silk that shimmered with an inner light. It was not a dress that shouted. It whispered of power and mystery. The cut was masterful, a high, elegant neckline that descended into a daringly low back, long sleeves, and a column silhouette that skimmed the body before flaring ever so slightly at the floor. It was the dress of a woman who was utterly unapologetically herself. Holding it against her body, she looked in the mirror. For the first time, the reflection didn't look like a stranger. It looked like a promise. Next, her jewelry box. It was filled with ostentatious pieces, Tavian heavy diamonds and garish gold, each one feeling like a beautifully crafted manacle. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened a small velvet-lined drawer at the bottom and pulled out the only pieces that truly belonged to her. A pair of antique earrings, delicate filigrees of silver set with small teardrop moonstones. They had been her grandmother's, a fellow academic who had always encouraged Kendall's passions. As she worked, a strange calm settled over her. This wasn't a panicked scramble. It was a meticulous, deliberate reclamation. She styled her own hair, sweeping it up into a chignon that was both classic and severe, leaving a few tendrils to frame her face. Her makeup was minimal but transformative, a bold, dark red lip that felt like a declaration of war. With 15 minutes to spare, she stood before the mirror once more. The woman looking back was someone she recognized from a long-forgotten dream. The emerald dress clung to her form, the moonstones gleamed against her skin, and her eyes, so often clouded with sadness, now shone with a brilliant, focused intensity. The simple navy dress of the forgotten wife lay discarded on a chair. This was Kendall Mayo unveiled. She slipped on a pair of simple black heels and grabbed a small velvet clutch. Her phone buzzed, a text from the concierge service Tavian used. "Your car is waiting downstairs, Mr. Grimsby." A wicked, delicious smile touched her lips. She typed a quick, polite reply to Desmond Pierce, accepting his invitation and letting him know she would meet him at the entrance. Then she called down to the doorman. "Robert, good evening," she said, her voice smooth and steady. "Mrs. Grimsby here. It seems my husband has taken his car. Could you please hail me a taxi? I'm running late for an engagement." There was a brief, surprised pause on the other end. "Of course, Mrs. Grimsby. Right away." Walking towards the elevator, she passed the portrait of her and Tavian that hung in the grand foyer, a soulless piece commissioned to celebrate their 5th anniversary. In it, she was smiling placidly, a pretty accessory to his powerful presence. She met the painted eyes of her husband and felt not a shred of fear or guilt, only a vast, liberating sense of distance. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into a new world. As she stepped out into the crisp night air, the doorman, Robert, held the door of a yellow taxi for her, his eyes wide with an astonishment he was trying and failing to conceal. "The Vanguard Hall, please," she told the driver, settling back into the worn seat. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, she looked up at the penthouse, a glittering jewel box in the sky. It had been her prison, a place where she had been made to feel small and insignificant. But tonight its light seemed to be fading behind her as she moved towards a brighter, more brilliant future. She wasn't Tavian Grimsby's wife stepping out for the first time in months. She was Kendall Mayo, answering a call she should have never ignored. The Vanguard Hall was a cathedral of wealth and influence. A river of black town cars and limousines flowed towards its grand columned entrance, depositing figures adorned in shimmering gowns and sharp tuxedos onto a plush red carpet. The air crackled with the energy of the city's elite, a symphony of polite laughter, whispered gossip, and the percussive flash of paparazzi cameras. Kendall's humble yellow taxi was a canary in a flock of crows pulling up a respectful distance behind a sleek black Rolls-Royce. She paid the driver her hand perfectly steady and stepped out onto the pavement. For a moment she was invisible, just another face in the crowd of onlookers. The photographer's lenses were aimed at the latest starlet or a revered politician. This anonymity was a shield allowing her a moment to breathe, to center herself before stepping into the light. She saw him immediately. Desmond Pierce was waiting just past the main entrance, a figure of understated academic elegance. He was older, with a shock of silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He saw her before she reached him, and a warm, appreciative smile spread across his face. "Ms. Mayo," he said, his voice a rich baritone. He took her hand and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of old-world respect. "You are even more striking than your writing. I am so glad you could make it." "Mr. Pierce," Kendall replied, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time that evening. "Thank you for the extraordinary invitation. The honor is all mine." "Nonsense." He waved a hand dismissively. "The honor will be ours if you agree to help us. But no shop talk for now. Let us get you a drink." As Desmond escorted her into the grand ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. The moment she was on his arm, the shield of anonymity vanished. Heads turned. The quiet hum of conversation faltered in their immediate vicinity as people took note. Desmond Pierce was not just a curator. He was a cultural kingmaker. The woman at his side was instantly a subject of intense speculation. Kendall could feel the weight of their gazes, but it was different from the crushing weight of Tavian's judgment. This was curiosity, not condemnation. She held her head high, her emerald dress catching the light of the crystal chandeliers, the moonstone earrings glowing softly. She didn't shrink or falter. She met the curious looks with a serene, confident gaze of her own. Across the vast, crowded room, Tavian Grimsby was holding court. He stood with a circle of powerful men, a glass of champagne in one hand, the other resting possessively on the small of Katrina Monroe's back. Katrina was his current project, a social media influencer with a manufactured pedigree and a dress that was more expensive than it was tasteful, a confection of red sequins that screamed for attention. She laughed too loudly at Tavian's remarks, her eyes constantly scanning the room, assessing her competition. Tavian was in his element, powerful and admired. He was in the middle of a self-congratulatory anecdote when he felt the subtle shift in the room's energy. He followed the gaze of one of his companions, his eyes scanning the crowd for the source of the disturbance. And then he saw her. For a full second, his brain failed to process the image. He saw a breathtaking woman in an emerald green dress, standing beside the one and only Desmond Pierce, looking as if she belonged there more than anyone else in the room. Her poise, her confidence, the way she commanded attention without demanding it, it was all foreign. Then his mind caught up. The face. It was Kendall. The champagne glass in his hand tilted a few drops, spilling onto the polished floor. A muscle in his jaw clenched. It was impossible. This couldn't be his quiet, simple wife. This was a different creature entirely. A stranger wearing her face. "Tavian, darling, are you all right?" Katrina purred, noticing his sudden rigidity. He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Kendall. He watched as Desmond Pierce leaned in to whisper something in her ear, and she laughed a low, musical sound that he hadn't heard in years. It was a laugh of genuine amusement, of effortless charm. It was not the stifled, polite chuckle she offered at his own dull dinner parties. Rage cold and pure surged through him. It was followed by a disorienting sense of confusion. How did she get here? Who was she with, and how in God's name did she know Desmond Pierce? But beneath the anger and confusion was a deeper, more unsettling emotion, a prickle of fear. The woman across the room was not the one he had left in the penthouse. The ornament had somehow gotten off its shelf, and it was shining with a brilliance he had never suspected it possessed. He had intended to keep her hidden to protect his image from her simplicity. But looking at her now, captivating the attention of the very people he sought to impress, he had a sinking feeling that he hadn't been protecting himself from her weakness, but from her strength. The ballroom was a galaxy of manufactured stars, each vying for the brightest glow. Tavian, recovering his composure, tried to dismiss the sight of Kendall. He turned back to his conversation, forcing a laugh and clapping a fellow developer on the back, but his performance was hollow. His gaze kept drifting back across the room to the vision in emerald green. He watched her move through the crowd with Desmond Pierce, not with the timid uncertainty he expected, but with a serene grace. She wasn't just being introduced. She was engaging, listening intently, her intelligent eyes alight with interest. He saw her speaking with a senator, then the CEO of a major tech firm. They weren't being polite. They were captivated. The simmering rage within him began to boil. She was making a fool of him. This was a calculated act of defiance, a public rebellion designed to humiliate him. "Who is that woman with Desmond Pierce?" Katrina asked a society columnist, standing nearby, her voice dripping with feigned nonchalance. The columnist squinted. "I have no idea. But if Desmond brought her, she must be somebody." The remark was a poisoned dart in Tavian's ego. Somebody. His wife, who he had deemed a nobody, was now being labeled a somebody, all without him. Kendall, for her part, was only vaguely aware of Tavian's presence. She was too absorbed, too alive. The conversations were stimulating, the art on the walls was magnificent, and for the first time in a decade, she felt like she was in her element. Desmond was a masterful guide, not just introducing her, but framing her. "This is Kendall Mayo," he would say, his voice filled with reverence. "Her work on Venetian preservation is about to change the game." Finally, the lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd. The host of the evening, the elegant and formidable matriarch of New York society, Mrs. Genevieve Beaumont, was walking towards the stage. She was a woman in her 70s, with piercing blue eyes and an air of authority that no amount of money could buy. Tavian immediately straightened his tie and guided Katrina closer to the stage, positioning himself for maximum visibility. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, a chance to be seen by the woman who held the keys to his next big project. Mrs. Beaumont tapped the microphone, her warm, clear voice filling the hall. "Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for your incredible generosity tonight in support of the city's youth arts programs." She spoke for several minutes, thanking key donors and patrons. Tavian smiled expectantly, anticipating a mention of his own significant contribution. But tonight, Mrs. Beaumont continued her expression, shifting to one of profound excitement. "I have another very special announcement to make. As many of you know, my family's greatest passion has always been the preservation of art. It is with immense pride that I announce the official endowment of the Beaumont Collection to the Metropolitan Legacy Museum." A wave of appreciative applause swept through the room. Tavian clapped enthusiastically, his eyes fixed on Mrs. Beaumont. "This collection," she went on, her voice filled with emotion, "is the work of a lifetime, and its centerpiece, a triptych by an artist we've only recently identified, has long been considered unrestorable, its beauty lost to time. We feared it would remain that way forever." She paused, letting the drama build. "Until now." Her eyes scanned the crowd, sweeping past Tavian without a flicker of recognition. Her gaze landed on the spot where Kendall stood with Desmond Pierce. A brilliant smile illuminated her face. Through a stroke of incredible fortune, our esteemed curator, Mr. Desmond Pierce, discovered the work of a scholar whose quiet genius has provided the key we have been searching for. Her research is not just brilliant, it is revolutionary. She has given us hope not just for our collection, but for countless other works that were once thought to be lost. Tavian felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine. He knew with sickening certainty what was coming next. Mrs. Beaumont raised her hand and gestured directly towards Kendall. "It is my profound honor to announce that this monumental restoration project will be led by this remarkable woman. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage the head of the Beaumont Collection Restoration Project, Miss Kendall Mayo." The spotlight swung away from the stage and cut through the dim ballroom landing directly on Kendall. For a heartbeat, the entire room was soiled, every single guest turning to stare. In the brilliant white light, her emerald dress seemed to ignite the moonstones at her ears, glowing like captured stars. She looked ethereal, powerful, and utterly breathtaking. Then the room exploded into applause. Tavian Grimsby stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The blood drained from his head, and the polite applause around him sounded like a roaring in his ears. Katrina stared, her perfectly painted mouth agape. The woman Tavian had called a distraction, the wife he had deemed unsuitable, was now the guest of honor. He had come to the gala to be in the spotlight, to cement his place among the elite. But in one shocking moment, the spotlight had found his wife instead, and he was left standing in her shadow, exposed and utterly insignificant. The applause was a wave washing over Kendall. For a fleeting second, the old instincts kicked in, the urge to shrink, to deflect the attention, to look for a shadow to hide in. But then she met Desmond's proud, encouraging gaze, and she felt the steel settle in her spine. This was not a moment to fear. It was a moment to claim. With a poise she didn't know she possessed, she gave a graceful nod and began to move towards the stage. The crowd parted for her, as if by magic. She was aware of the whispers, the astonished looks, the frantic murmuring, as people tried to place her. "Mayo? Is she one of the Boston Mayos? I've never seen her before. My God, that dress!" Her path took her directly past Tavian. She didn't plan it, but she couldn't avoid it. As she drew level with him, her eyes met his. The shock on his face was visceral, his handsome features twisted into a mask of rage and utter bewilderment. He looked like a king whose crown had just been snatched from his head in front of his entire court. In that moment, he didn't see his wife. He saw a threat, a betrayal of the highest order. He reached out his hand, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "Kendall!" He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper, meant for her ears alone. "What is the meaning of this? What game are you playing?" His touch was like a spark on dry tinder. All the years of silent resentment, of swallowed words and stifled ambitions, coalesced into a single point of cold, clear fury. She stopped. She didn't flinch or pull away. She simply turned her head slowly to look down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his face. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the soft, hesitant murmur he was used to. It was low, steady, and cut through the air like chilled steel. "Let go of me, Tavian," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The sheer, unexpected force of her tone made him recoil as if he'd been burned. His hand dropped from her arm. People nearby, sensing the sudden tension, fell silent, their eyes wide. Katrina, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to assert her position. She stepped forward, linking her arm through Tavian's. "Darling," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine condescension as she addressed Kendall. "You must be so confused. This is a private event. Perhaps your invitation had a misprint." Kendall didn't even grant Katrina a full glance. Her focus was entirely on Tavian. She held his gaze for a long moment, letting him see the stranger she had become, or rather the woman she had been all along. The woman he had tried and failed to erase. With a final dismissive look, she turned her back on him and continued her walk to the stage, leaving him standing there speechless and exposed, with his mistress clinging to his arm like a gaudy accessory. The public rejection was absolute, a silent, devastating blow, delivered with more power than any shout could have achieved. On stage, Mrs. Beaumont greeted her with a warm embrace. "My dear," the older woman murmured, "I am so thrilled. You are a lifesaver." Mrs. Beaumont handed her the microphone. Kendall stepped up to the podium, her heart hammering, but her mind clear. She looked out over the sea of faces, powerful, influential, and all staring at her. She saw Desmond smiling from the front row, and in the middle of the crowd, she saw Tavian, his face ashen, his empire of ego crumbling around him. "Thank you, Mrs. Beaumont." Kendall began, her voice ringing out clear and confident through the ballroom's excellent sound system. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. I am overwhelmed by your faith in me. For a long time, I have been a quiet student of the past, finding solace in bringing beauty back to things that were forgotten or overlooked. She paused, letting her eyes sweep the room, letting the subtle double meaning of her words settle. The Beaumont collection is not just a collection of paintings. It is a collection of stories, of histories, of passions. Like anything of true value, it requires patience, respect, and a delicate touch to reveal its true brilliance. Sometimes the most beautiful things are hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to see their worth. The speech was short, elegant, and powerful. It was a mission statement, not just for the art, but for herself. When she finished, the applause was even louder, more genuine this time. It was a validation not of her name or her husband's wealth, but of her talent and her spirit. As she stepped down from the stage, she was immediately enveloped by a crowd of admirers. A museum board member wanted to discuss her techniques. A wealthy collector wanted to know her opinion on a piece he owned. The senator from earlier was congratulating her warmly. She was no longer an appendage of Tavian Grimsby. She was Kendall Mayo, a force in her own right. From across the room, Tavian watched the scene, a storm of impotent fury raging within him. He had orchestrated the entire evening to be his coronation, but he had become a footnote in his own wife's ascension. Every handshake she received, every impressed smile sent her way, was another nail in the coffin of his pride. He had refused to take his wife out because he was ashamed of her. Now, standing in a room full of the world's most powerful people, he had never felt so ashamed of himself. The rest of the evening unfolded for Kendall, not as a dream, but as a homecoming to a life she had been forced to abandon. The initial shock of the announcement gave way to a steady, invigorating hum of purpose. She was no longer a ghost haunting the edges of Tavian's world. She was the gravitational center of a new one, and she found its pull exhilarating. She was swept from one fascinating conversation to another, each one a thread weaving her back into the vibrant tapestry of the intellectual and cultural world she so dearly missed. The director of a prestigious Parisian museum, a formidable man she had only ever read about in art journals, engaged her in a spirited debate about the merits of a new pigment analysis technique. A renowned art collector, known for his reclusive nature, sought her out to ask her opinion on a disputed Titian he had recently acquired. He listened to her thoughtful, nuanced response with an expression of rapt attention. For the first time in a decade, she wasn't just offering a polite, pre-approved opinion. She was sharing her expertise, her passion, and it was being met not with condescension, but with genuine respect and admiration. It was as if a part of her soul, long locked away and gathering dust, had been thrown open to the light and air, and was breathing deeply once more. Across the ballroom, Tavian watched this metamorphosis with a curdling mixture of fury and dread. He was marooned on a small island of his own making, while the tide of social relevance washed away from him, all flowing towards Kendall. His attempts to re-engage with his circle were met with polite but distinctly cool responses. Their eyes would dart over his shoulder towards the growing crowd around his wife, their attention clearly elsewhere. He had become yesterday's news in the space of a single speech. Even Katrina, his glittering prize, had begun to tarnish. She was a creature of social momentum, and she could sense his was rapidly decelerating. Her hand, which had been so possessively on his arm, now rested on her own hip. Her laughter, once a loud declaration of her place by his side, was now a nervous titter directed at a more promising hedge fund manager nearby. "Quite a surprise your wife sprung on you," a business rival commented, with a smirk, passing by with a fresh glass of champagne. "You kept her talents well hidden." The jab was casual, but expertly placed, and it struck Tavian like a physical blow. He saw Katrina's eyes narrow, her mind performing a swift and ruthless calculation. She looked from Tavian's thunderous, powerless face to Kendall's serene, radiant one. Without another word, she detached herself from his side, murmuring a flimsy excuse about needing to find the powder room. She then made a direct course for the circle surrounding Kendall, a predatory smile fixed on her face, ready to attach herself to the new source of power. It was a betrayal so swift and transparent that it left Tavian breathless with rage. The final crushing blow came from the architect of the evening's triumph herself. Tavian saw Mrs. Genevieve Beaumont moving through the crowd with the unhurried grace of a battleship, her course set directly for him. A pathetic, desperate flicker of hope ignited within him. Perhaps this was a formality, a discussion about his donation, a chance to salvage something from the wreckage. But her expression as she came to a stop before him was not one of negotiation. It was a look of profound, clinical disappointment, the kind a judge gives before passing a sentence that has long been decided. "Mr. Grimsby," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier warmth. It was formal, clipped, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "I believe we had a preliminary discussion regarding my foundation's potential investment in your waterfront development." "Yes, Mrs. Beaumont. I was so hoping we could finalize the details." Tavian began, his voice straining for a normalcy he did not feel. "I'm certain you'll find the projections." She silenced him with a subtle, almost imperceptible raise of her hand. "My foundation and I personally make it a point to partner with individuals who demonstrate integrity, vision, and a deep abiding respect for true value. Not just in business dealings, Mr. Grimsby, but in all aspects of their lives." Her gaze shifted for a mere second, a pointed, meaningful flicker towards Kendall, who was now laughing at something the Parisian museum director had said. The message was unmistakable. "It has become abundantly clear to me this evening," Mrs. Beaumont continued, her eyes returning to him cold as chips of ice, "that our core values are not aligned. Your judgment in more ways than one has proven to be profoundly flawed. We will be withdrawing our interest in your project, effective immediately. A formal notice will be sent to your office in the morning." She did not wait for a response. He was not worthy of one. She gave him a curt, dismissive nod and turned away, leaving Tavian standing alone in the center of a suddenly very empty space. The Beaumont investment was more than just capital. It was the seal of legitimacy, the keystone in the arch of his most ambitious project. Without it, the entire structure would collapse into a mountain of debt and ruin. His reputation would be shattered. He had walked into the gala a king and would leave as a pariah, dethroned by the very woman he had sought to imprison. Kendall departed shortly after a quiet, graceful exit. Desmond Pierce, a true gentleman, escorted her through the thinning crowd to a private car he had summoned. "You were magnificent tonight, Kendall," he said, his eyes filled with a warm, paternal pride. "You reminded everyone what true substance looks like. The art world found its new star." "Thank you, Desmond," she said, her voice thick with an emotion that went far beyond gratitude. "For everything. You have no idea what you've done for me." "I think I do," he replied gently, holding the car door for her. He smiled. "Welcome back." The words echoed in her heart all the way back to the penthouse. Welcome back. She hadn't realized just how far away she'd been. When she stepped out of the elevator, the oppressive silence of the apartment was broken by the clink of glass on marble. All the lights were blazing. Tavian was in the center of the vast living room, his impeccably tailored suit, now rumpled his tie, ripped loose from his collar. A half-empty bottle of expensive scotch sat on the table beside him, a testament to his lonely, bitter vigil. The mask of invincible confidence was not just gone. It had been shattered, revealing the raw, ugly desperation beneath. "So," he began, his voice a low, venomous slur as he staggered to his feet. "That was quite the performance. Meticulously planned, I assume, all this time playing the part of the dutiful, simple little wife. Were you laughing at me? Was this your grand plan all along? To humiliate me?" Kendall paused, placing her velvet clutch on the console table with a soft, deliberate click. She looked at him, at this broken, raging man, and felt not a flicker of the fear that had once defined her existence. The power dynamic between them had not just been altered, it had been incinerated and remade from the ashes. "There was no plan, Tavian," she said, her voice unnaturally calm and clear. "There was only an invitation, an opportunity, one that I decided to accept. You told me I wasn't suitable, that I didn't belong in your world." She took a slow step into the room, her presence commanding the space in a way it never had before. "It turns out you were wrong. Or perhaps," she added, her voice dropping to a cool, cutting whisper, "it was never your world to begin with. It was just a stage, and you were always a lesser actor than you believed." "A lesser actor?" he roared, his voice cracking. "My world is falling apart because of you. The Beaumont deal is dead. The waterfront project is dead. My reputation is ruined. Do you have any idea what that means?" "Yes, I do," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "It means that you built your world on a foundation of arrogance, deceit, and cruelty. You treated people as objects, as pawns in your game, myself included. Foundations like that are not meant to last, Tavian. They are destined to crumble under their own weight. You are the architect of your own ruin. I was just the part of the design you foolishly overlooked." He stared at her, his drunken mind flailing, unable to comprehend the transformation. This was not his Kendall. This was a stranger, a queen who had calmly walked into his castle and declared it her own. The woman he thought he knew, the one he had so carefully molded and controlled, was gone forever, if she had ever truly existed at all. "I'm leaving Tavian," she said, the words spoken with a simple, devastating finality. "My lawyer will be in contact with yours in the morning regarding the terms of our separation. I will arrange to have my personal things, the few things that are actually mine, moved out by the end of the week." She turned her back straight, her steps unhurried, and walked towards the guest wing of the apartment, to a room she had not slept in for years. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to see but the wreckage. The gilded cage was finally open, and she was flying free into a sky of her own making. Behind her, Tavian Grimsby finally collapsed into his chair, the sound of his own ragged breath filling the vast empty room. He was surrounded by priceless art, stunning views, and every conceivable luxury, a king in a kingdom of ashes. The silence that descended was absolute, a profound emptiness that echoed the one now hollowed out inside of him. It was the sound of his entire world crashing down around him. Kendall's story is a powerful reminder that true value is never determined by someone else's opinion. For years, she allowed her brilliance to be hidden, convinced by the man who should have been her biggest champion that she was not enough. But a person's worth is not a currency to be spent or devalued by another. It is an intrinsic quality waiting for the right moment to shine. Her triumph wasn't just about walking into a gala. It was about walking back into her own life, reclaiming her identity, and proving that the quietest voices often have the most profound things to say. She didn't need to tear her husband down. His own arrogance and cruelty did that for him. She simply had to rise, and in doing so she let him fall. If her journey from the shadows into the spotlight inspired you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with anyone who has ever felt overlooked or underestimated. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of justice and empowerment. What did you think of Kendall's transformation? Let us know in the comments below.